Karen, welcome aboard to the show. So happy to have you today.
Thank you for having me, Ari. I'm great to be here.
So, what the audience don't know is that this is like the third time or something that we're trying to make this happen. I'm happy that we stuck with it and made it happen. I always have a warm spot in my heart for guests that are in the product world, creating stuff for people to get value and joy. Let me start off with my first question. You went to Stanford. From Stanford, what got you into product management? Like, what was the moment where you're like, oh, why don't I do that?
Yeah. Well, I like to say it was like more planned out and intentional, but I grew up with immigrant parents and didn't really get a lot of career guidance. And so my first job out of college was in supply chain at Cisco Systems, and it just didn't quite, fill my cup in terms of the type of work. And I had a kind of a quarter life crisis thinking, oh my gosh, this can't be the rest of my career. And so I went back to grad school, and that's where I went to Stanford. And I was just looking around what other people were doing, and product was, just starting to become more of a domain. And it seemed exciting. It seemed like more collaborative and creative. There's a mix of like hard skills and soft skills. And so I kind of just said, okay, well, I'm going to do that and start interviewing, and I got my first job in product, and that's kind of how it happened, and been doing product ever since.
You won't believe this, but first of all, that's hysteric, quarter life crisis. I was in Siemens doing supply chain and manufacturing as well, and asked myself the exact same question before I went to University of Chicago. I was like, this can't be what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And again, no offense to the wonderful people that I met in manufacturing. It definitely is very interesting. There's a lot to it, but it's not something I wanted to continue with. The what delights you when it comes to product? Is it solving technical issues? Is it working with people? Like, where do you find joy?
Yeah, good question. I find joy in achievement, and that can take shape in many forms. But when I build something and people are finding value in it and liking it and using it and adopting it, like I get excited, and I love that process. I think it's very creative, and I used to have this very, very rigid way of thinking what creativity is.
Mm,
I imagine someone that was like a designer or a painter, but like I think there's creativity in all sorts of ways people can show up at work. And I think product management is very creative, the way you solve problems and, working under constraints. And I do love the people aspect of product management. I love working with my counterparts in engineering. I love my working with my product team. I love working with UX and design. And then also working with stakeholders. It's very collaborative. And so you just get like you learn so much through different people. And so I really think I just have a learner's mindset. So the more diversity in the thinking, the way you come approach problems, I think the more empathetic and the better you are as a leader overall.
so that's a great segue to my question. We come into product thinking, okay, we're managing the product, we're going to make product decisions. We get this big slap in the face to understand that even though we don't manage anybody directly, we are leaders in the organization, big
Oh,
time.
100%.
And even though we don't have the ability to tell people what to do through being their boss, we need to get buy-in. We need to get people from point A to B. What was that point in your career where you're like, oh my God, I have no authority, but I have to get all this stuff done? And then you're kind of like, okay, how do I do that? What did you pick up and learn on the way?
Yeah, something that didn't come naturally to me at first was the relationship aspect of product management. Like
Mm,
I had to learn it. And again, like I didn't have a ton of like mentorship and guidance earlier in my career. And it really is like a foundational piece.
yes.
And I think it can differ depending on the organization. So I did start more B2C, and consumer products, a lot of it's like conversion and analytics, and there's less like buy-in from many stakeholders. But as I transitioned into more B2B roles, that became a big part of the job, which was like influencing across the organization. And I don't think you can be successful without that type of influence. And I think there were some like good managers I had across, along the way who kind of helped me with that. One manager, when I was leaving a role, I asked him, and I think this is a great question to ask anyone when you're, especially when you're on the way out. It's like, hey, what advice do you have to give to me in my next roles and in my career? And he gave me really good advice. He said, hey, Karen, you're all about getting stuff done, but maybe you need to take a moment to think about the relationships and build those up
Mm,
before.
mm,
And I took that to heart. I think that was a really key like piece of advice that I always think about whenever I'm going to a new organization, whenever someone new is in the organization, whenever I'm taking over a new team. Like those are very important. That's very important
yeah.
for being effective. And so I just spend more time and focus on that.
I will make a confession here that in my first companies, I crashed and burned exactly on these mistakes. And nowadays, it is such a focus. It is so much easier to get shit done when you have people that trust you, that want to work with you, and it's fun to work with you.
Mm.
And building those relationships, it just makes like a huge difference. Instead of fighting the windmill, you're just running in the wind. It's beautiful. So
Yep.
I hugely appreciate that. You talked about feedback.
Hmm.
Feedback, on the one hand, is kind of parts what product does every single day, right? Voice of customer, we listen to our customers, internal stakeholders, external stakeholders. But when it comes to be personal, it can be a little bit more difficult. How
Hmm.
do you manage getting feedback, even at the personal level?
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is where people really need to listen with an open mind and think about, even if you don't accept the feedback 100%, there's some element that you should take away from it,
Hmm.
right? Like there's something that you're coming off that maybe is useful information for you to know. I think one of the most effective thing people can do is around having a self-awareness about themselves. When I was at Stanford, I took this like the class, they call it touchy feely, which it's just like a weird name, but essentially it was this concept of a T group, and I won't go into the details of it, but essentially you're in these groups and you kind of just like talk about miscellaneous topics, and they encourage you to be really open and transparent with like, hey, last week when you said this to me, I felt like this. And it's not about like you, it's about how they felt, and focusing more on like the feelings around on like how you did something to make them feel a certain way. And it's supposed to help you build that kind of self-awareness of, when I come in a certain way, like I need to think about the other side. I very much think about that as like being empathetic, having the, emotional intelligence around working with people makes you a more effective leader. And so when you get hard feedback, I think about leveraging that to build your emotional intelligence and figuring out like how you can be more effective next time. Because even if you don't like this person, you think they're, an idiot, whatever, like it's still information that you should leverage, right?
I think the point in my career where I was like, okay, I need to rethink this. I got the same exact feedback from three different people that are unconnected to each
Yeah.
other. So I was like, wait, hold on. Maybe I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to work on this. So that, in some ways, getting feedback and figuring out that you do need to change is a gift. And what I figured out, and that was true to me at that young age of 20, is that I wasn't welcoming feedback. I
Mm.
was actually, through demeanor, through behavior, through reaction, through response or behavior, when you get feedback, how you respond will actually dictate if you get feedback the next time.
Oh, 100%. I've given feedback to people which went terribly before, and then it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to give feedback for that person.
That's
So
right.
I always thank people because it takes courage for them to
Yeah.
share that information with you.
Yeah.
And then you can figure out what you want to do with it, right? And I think of it like as product leaders, you get all sorts of crazy feedback on your product, and some of it doesn't make sense and some of it does make sense, but then it's about taking those patterns and figure out what to do with it. And even the ones that don't quite make sense because it's not in the realm of possible or whatever, like it's still an interesting insight into like how they perceive your product, and you might not decide to directly address that issue, but you might find like an adjacent area that does make sense for you to address. And I think of that's like, building that muscle for your product is
Right.
like the same muscle that you build for like your own self growth and your own career and your own personal brand.
I will. This is not at the beginning of the meeting. Beginning, I'm all focused on what's the process, what's the pain, how do you use it, what's the structure of organization, all that. But I'll leave like 5 minutes to ask the following question: why does our software suck? And the reason that I frame that question like that is because I found that people don't want to give you that feedback. They kind of want to sugarcoat it, and they don't want to give you the feedback of what they don't like. Not in all cases. Some people will just come out with it. But framing I want feedback. I want you to be brutal. I want you to be direct. I want you to tell me what's wrong. Just frame it in that way, I found can be tremendously valuable. And if the customer or person, or if this is your wife or husband or whatever, why do I suck? Right? How can I do better? They will tell you if you
Yeah.
frame it like that. And it can be a life-changing experience. So I would encourage people to think about not only about the discipline, about how product managers get shit done, but how it can actually be a tool for life. On that vein, you've done some interesting stuff where you've adopted your tools and techniques from product and brought it into your life. Tell us the story about the fitness post that you put out. I thought that was delightful.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah. Well, yeah, for people who know me, they know I'm obsessed with fitness. And yeah, I conducted an experiment where, every year I'm like, have some sort of fitness goal. And it's like, I think this was a year ago. I decided I was going to start tracking my calories because, what they say is like, you can't optimize what you don't measure. And so what I discovered as I was tracking, and I did it for a course of, I want to say, a few months, and it's imperfect because I'm estimating certain things, like then you're eat out or you're like at a work meeting and you don't track it perfectly. But back when I'm my home routine, I would like track it as well as I could. And what was interesting to me is I'm so into working out and lifting weights and running that I wasn't really eating enough protein.
Mm,
And there's a whole trend of protein, but even before the whole trend of protein happened, I just, I was getting half of my calories from fat, and they were healthy fats,
mm,
olive oil and nuts, etc. But it was still like not what I was, it's not what was recommended. And it's so funny. So then come like several months later, I decided to like re-up my routine and kind of reevaluate. And what I decided to do is I decided to up my macros,
mm,
and try to manage my macros better. And so I just did this recently this year where I have the same fitness routine, but I changed my macro intake and I actually adjusted my diet quite a bit where now I hit a certain amount of protein over 100 grams minimum. And then everything else kind of like, trickles down. But what's amazing is that I saw major results that I wasn't expecting because
all right.
I'm already a very fit, lean person, but I actually lost like several pounds, and then I use a DEXA scan on a regular basis to
Mm,
have even more in depth measurement. And I dropped like 3 percentage points on body fat while I lost weight, but then gained muscle mass. So it was like kind of like game changing. I felt like I almost was like, why didn't I do this sooner? And it was really around getting the data first, thinking, oh, I'm eating enough protein, and then realizing like I'm not. And it was just
mm.
all like a series of different experiments to see how it resulted in
So
my
you
fitness
you
level.
do this kind of scientific method every day at work. What was the point where you're like, oh, I'll do this in my personal life as well? What made you change that mindset?
At some point you're like, this isn't working. Like you work so hard. Like I work out like 5, 6 days a week. I mean, I have
Mm,
to force myself to take a break,
mm,
like I have to force myself on the seventh day to like not work out. So, like you're fit and I'm, in no shape or form was I like, overweight, but I was just trying to optimize.
right.
And so I just wanted to see what would happen, and like that's what experiments are for. Like you
Did
same way they
the
do experiments.
did the kind of success of moving the needle through the scientific method that's now working in your private life, not only at work, did that carry on for you to do more kind of private life experiments and kind of use more data in your private life? Have you done that?
I mean, I've actually been really interested in these blood sugar spike things. There's a lot of
Mm.
people wearing those devices, and there's this guy on social media that eats different things, and like I'm kind of obsessed with it. And he talks about his blood sugar spike. So people have mentioned that to me, like, "Oh, are you going to do that next?" And I was like, maybe, like that might be the next experiment. But I want to hold the protein intake firm and then see how that panned out. And clearly, I've seen like some very good results from it. But then maybe next year will be another experiment.
I love that. When you going back to kind of team and communication, we come into product management and we think that, oh, we're just managing the product. We find that we become very involved with leadership,
Mhm.
and we find that we learn certain leadership lessons the hard way. What are some of the hard-earned leadership lessons that you wish you knew at the beginning of your road?
Oh, that's a good one. I think for me, I have like an intensity to me, especially when it comes to work and things I'm really passionate about.
Mm.
And I think there's at times where it can be a little too intense, and I almost feel like I need to take a step back. I think there's like someone that I follow on LinkedIn, and he talks a lot about executive presence and also about
Yeah,
a lot of
the
like
lawyer guy, right?
I don't know if it's a lawyer
No,
guy, but
I thought we
anyways,
talked about him last time.
yeah,
Maybe
maybe we
I'm.
talked about him.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he talks a lot about like controlling your emotions,
Mm.
and I can have like highs and lows in terms of like I get really excited, and and then I can get like a little like so I sometimes think about that, and I think about sometimes the way I come off in meetings that maybe I need to like kind of like I think there was probably opportunity for me to say things a little differently so that it was heard better. So I think things like that are things you should like as you develop in your leadership, like you need to think about where are the times where I need to start thinking about I might have like could have done better in terms of that communication, etc. So I definitely think there's you know, I'm not perfect. I don't admit to be perfect. So I definitely know there's opportunities there for me because I do have that intensity
I,
and
I,
I do it a
I
lot.
absolutely love your humility. I think that self-awareness, which is what you're showcasing today, is absolutely 100% a superpower because it allows you to become better. If you're just not aware of what's happening, then there's no way you can improve anything. So I think that is absolutely a superpower.
Thank you. Yeah, I do think I'm self-aware. I've definitely done a lot of work on myself in terms of like, I am an introvert, so it doesn't come naturally for me to, you know, yeah, but I've worked on that over time. Yeah.
I'll tell you a secret.
Yeah.
Um, when I was, whatever, 11, 13, hoodie, like no jeans, playing Dungeons and Dragons
Yeah.
in the basement,
Yeah.
no sports, scared of the outside world. So hardcore introvert. Programming, I was a developer early in career, programming 10, 12 hours. So this introvert thing is a thing that if you come into product and sales, it's kind of forced upon you. You kind of have to learn it.
Yeah.
Sorry, the extrovert thing. You
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of have to learn
You have
it.
to learn to exist and be
Yeah,
effective. Yes, yeah.
yes. What for those geeks like you and I'll bucket us together here for a second. Any advice on if to go on that journey and why?
Yeah. Yeah, I think one is like knowing what your comfort level is and knowing like should you go into a role where you are expected to be, show your extroversion side as much as possible. That's one. And the second is like practice. I just practice. And like sometimes like for example, like I'll have customer meetings or have like, high stakes conversations that I will prep like a lot, like a script level prep. Like I'll have talking points all written out and I'm not going to intend to read it, but I'm going to like make sure I carefully choose my words. Um, and that's just a method for me to like to make it happen. And then I think as I've like gone over like, grown in my career, like you just build that confidence and that muscle and and it's gotten easier. But yeah, I started very much like you. I spent my summers in the library. I did everything myself. Group work was a little bit not as like easy for me. I was very very independent. So and then the product is so collaborative, and also
Yeah.
you're selling your ideas and you're in front of customers, like you got to talk to people. So um I've had to develop it, and I have to admit it was uncomfortable at first, but I got over it.
Yeah. It's amazing how many things you have to do. You're marketing, you're selling, you're
Yes.
teching deep into the engineering team. Uh, it's definitely a challenging role. I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, it's definitely multifaceted, which I think is both fun and daunting at the same time.
This is true. Karen, I have one last question. Believe it or not, we're
Yeah.
almost out of time.
Okay.
If you had to go back to young, and this is a difficult question because it's personal.
Okay.
If you had to go back to young Karen,
Mhm.
what would you advise her?
Oh, great question. What's funny is like I never thought I'd get to where I am in life. It was I started off with like very, you know, um, you know, no very poor, child of undocumented immigrant. And I would never have imagined my life would be what it is today. And so I felt a lot of despair when I was younger, and I would have just encouraged myself to believe in myself. And I think that's still true. Even like when I was just starting off in my career and then more mid career, I felt like I was going to get stuck and never rise into leadership levels. I just didn't see people that looked like me in leadership levels at the time. And so, yeah, it would just be more encouragement and telling me that I can do it.
And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank
This was an
you.
absolute delight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.